Welcome to Curious Joel, a show about curiosity taking us deeper into the topics of people's passion and interesting conversation. I'm your host, Joel Circo. My guest today is Sean Mills. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Joel. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm excited to be back into my podcasting after several different life changes, um, but I've had taken a bit of a break, so I'm excited to be podcasting again. um, so, Sean, what is your passion?
Comic books.
Comic books. So how did that start?
Growing up, my father has a long-standing, or at least he did back when he was a younger man, comic book collection of his own. And they were in the house when I was growing up. Most of them were bagged and boarded and packaged and put away safely uh, for future preservation.
Gotcha.
But there were plenty of worn down coverless issues that he let us read. Plenty of other things, superhero comic related, that he let us read. Um, and growing up in the 80s, with an abundance of Ninja Turtles and Transformers and G.I. Joe
Hmm.
cartoons to watch, that then led into all of the superhero cartoons of the 90s, like X-Men,
Hmm.
Spider-Man, Batman, and the like. So really, I was primed from an early age to be into superhero shows and comics. There was the original Batman show. All that
Hmm.
stuff growing up was just my pop culture zeitgeist.
All right. Do you happen to remember like what the first comic you read was?
Nope, no clue. My memory
No. Okay.
is terrible.
No worries. Um. So you kind of had a couple of like worn down comics that got you into the shows, and then the shows kind of fed back into the comics.
Yep, pretty much.
Okay. So really quick, just for my audience out there, comics can be a very broad thing, and there's some people that are going to be making assumptions. So DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, like what's your cup of tea?
Superhero comics from, they're called the Big Two, DC and Marvel Comics. They
Hmm.
make Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, X-Men, all the popular ones. But in my
Right.
adult years, I've definitely traveled out into some of the other publishers and some of the non-superhero comics. So nowadays, while I do largely just focus on the superheroes, I gladly read anything that comes in, highly recommended, or I randomly find from a creator I like. So I'll
Hmm.
read pretty much anything these days.
So to get just to give people some insight, because I know there's people out there that are listening that only really know that there's DC and Marvel. A couple might know Dark Horse, but what are some of the other publishers that you like, bigger publishers that might be flying under the radar for the common folk?
Well, obviously, you said Marvel and DC are the big two.
Mm-hmm.
Image Comics is probably number three.
Mm-hmm.
They largely print creator-owned original series. They have some
Okay.
ongoing comics like Spawn or Savage Dragon that have been ongoing since the 90s. That would qualify as like ongoing superhero comics, but really they publish all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not all comics are superhero genre. There's crime, there's horror, there's romance,
Right.
there's supernatural, there's fantasy, there's everything. Any kind of genre books have, comics do that genre as well. Beyond that, there's
Right.
Dark Horse, IDW. They both do a lot of licensed comics like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Sonic the
Mm-hmm.
Hedgehog, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And these licenses kind of bounce between different publishers whenever their license is up and someone new outbids them to get the license. So there's lots of different
Okay.
runs of all these popular franchises, and they also do original stuff as well. And then you keep going, further down the rabbit hole is all sorts of indie publishers and smaller publishers and the like.
Okay. Yeah. So you were talking about like the 80s to like 90s and those cartoons and stuff like that, and those have a specific vibe to them. what's kept your interest past that? Because I mean, I know a lot of people they grew up with cartoons and now they're adults, and adults don't do adult things, and cartoons aren't adult things, and comic books are for kids and stuff like that. What's kept you really focused on this, where you were still up to date on things?
Um, hmm, Mostly just being able to access well-written, entertaining stories. You know, everyone wants stories, and I like stories about heroes doing good, fighting
Okay,
bad guys, and being heroes. And superhero comics and other comics have obviously a plethora of that, but mostly it's just easy access to well-written, enjoyable, entertaining media.
nice. Um, how do you feel the shift in like the superhero genre has changed since then? Because I know for me, um, there's times where I'm watching a reboot of some old cartoon or some comic book, and for me, I feel like there's a lot more of the like darker, grittier things that are taking the more lighthearted stories and going, well, but what if there was way more drama, and what if things were kind of worse? Um, how do you feel about like the total air of the comics and superhero genres?
This is for sure my era. I wouldn't necessarily categorize it all as like grim and gritty, the shift. Obviously, that's part of it. But
Hmm.
I feel the shift is to more grounded stories and realism.
Okay.
This came up a lot in the 80s and kind of persists to today. You know, obviously back in the day, it was all whiz bang, pow zoom, Adam West kind of feel to it. You know, the 80s brought along a world of realism, which I didn't get into in the time because I wasn't reading comics at the time. So I kind of
Hmm.
dealt with like the whiz bang, bright colored costumes up through the 90s. You know, but once I got a taste of realism in comics, I think that's probably my favorite genre when you take the superheroes and cross them with realism. And I think that's kind of what the modern age is all about. Um,
Okay.
Putting these characters and stories in a more realistic, real world kind of feel to them. And I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of it. And you know, I like a good grim and gritty comic. I like a good whiz bang comic if they do it right. And the you know, like I said, the genres for everything.
Okay. All right. I like that. I guess I never really thought of them like as just more of realistic settings and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was big
Um.
in the 2000s and 2010s,
Hmm.
and was my peak comic reading period.
Gotcha. Um. So I talked about like the different comic producers, but what are like some of your favorite heroes or teams over the years? Like that, if you see a comic that's dropped with, you know, I almost said X team, but it's like, well, that's an actual thing, X Men, X teams, and yeah, but like, you know, if it's like, oh, that's a Justice League, I'm gonna get it, or if it's, you know, Justice Society, I'm gonna get that, or it's a Spider Man, I'm definitely gonna have to get that. Like, what are your like favorite heroes teams out there right now?
Most of the classics that anyone will name, the X-Men are have always
Hmm.
been big for me. I'll always give the X-Men a try.
Hmm.
The world of Batman, I'm always a big fan of Batman. I'm actually a bigger fan of Robin than Batman.
Oh,
So
really?
if they got a really good Robin comic or a Batman and Robin team up comic, I am into that. And I try to get into Spider-Man every now and then, but he hasn't had a good run in a while, so I kind of fall off of Spider-Man. But yeah, X-Men, Batman, Spider-Man, usually
Okay.
my top uh, whole families of comics.
Yeah. I, I will say that I was a little surprised by the Robin specifically. I feel like not a lot of people will fan over Robin.
Oh yeah,
Um, is it Robin specifically, or like the role of Robin? So whether it's Robin going on to Nightwing, Robin going into Red Hood, like, do you like those stories as well, or just when they're Robin?
mostly just when they're Robin. I
Okay,
like the mantle of Robin more so than any individual
gotcha.
character. And obviously, there have been dozens of Robins.
Sure, yeah.
It just comes from growing up. The Batman Adam West TV show. Robin was a
Hmm.
big part of that. And I just was one of those, kids in the kindergarten or the playground. I never saw myself as Batman. I wasn't the top dog of the playground. So I think I always saw myself as more of a sidekick character.
Okay.
So I got into Robin, and I like a good story where Robin is a good partner and sidekick to Batman. So give me a good Batman story where he has Robin, at his side or in the cave or just doing his job as Robin. And that's an ideal Batman story for me.
So, quick side note, talking about Robins and their roles. Did you ever watch the Lego Batman movie?
Well, of course.
How did you feel about that Robin?
That was great.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
I
did a great job.
I I I tell people that there's certain things I like about the Batman, Lego Batman, and like his Bat family, and things I don't. And but the Robin portrayal I thought was a very lighthearted take on Robin that I actually liked a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
The thing about comics and adaptations is you just gotta let go of your preconceived notions and just accept it for what it is. And so, yeah, I mean, so I love I love the Lego movies. I love the Lego Batman movie, and they did a great job with Robin. I'm very happy that he got to be a focus in that.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, it brings a lot of joy to myself whenever I think of those scenes. Robin's just like this doe-eyed kid, like I'll do whatever you say because you're the greatest ever.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, so speaking of like not not derivatives, but like offshoots of Batman, do you play any of the Batman like games?
of course. I'm also
Okay.
big into video games.
Okay. So like what would be your top like superhero video game?
Top
Like
superhero video game.
yeah, because we have a lot of different genres because you have like Injustice, which is more of a Street
Fighter game.
Fighter fighting game. You have like the Arkham games where you're playing as Batman, trying to be both detective and action hero. Um, you have Kill the Justice League, which is less superhero focused. But we have the Avengers kind of action games. Um, like what's your go-to for superhero video games?
I would say the best superhero video games of all time would be the Batman Arkham quadrilogy,
Okay.
followed closely by the modern Spider-Man games we've been getting.
Oh my God. Okay, I will say, I played the Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4,
Yeah, I
and
think that's when it came out.
yeah, the mechanics for like getting around New York and the upgrades and special abilities depending on which Spider-Man you're playing as. That was the first time in a long time I've thoroughly felt immersed in a superhero character. Like
Oh yeah, they have
it's
been
just,
they perfected Spider-Man's web slinging back
hmm
in the PlayStation 2 era,
yeah.
but that was, from my understanding, copyrighted by the guy who wrote the code on how to swing like Spider-Man in that game.
Oh.
So they've never been able to just repeat it. But the new games come as close as anything ever has.
Hmm.
And there's now like three different games in this series, and all of them
Yeah.
are phenomenal. Just
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you don't even need to play the game. You can just load up for an afternoon and just swing around the city
Right.
playing the actual gameplay that's unique to this character in these games. So
Yeah.
you're not going to find it anywhere else, and it's just
Right.
that well
Yeah.
crafted.
It was the first time that like I could go from like watching a Spider-Man game or watching a Spider-Man movie and then I could play the game and I could have that same sensation of like that those the epic swinging scene in the Spider-Man movies where you're like he like swings between trucks and like flips and you get a like that rush of adrenaline of flying through the air and like playing the game gives me the same exact thing.
Oh
you
yeah,
know like that you can get those like really high like flings and then you can like just dive straight down and you just feel like you're doing it actually. So
oh
and
yeah.
then you can just kind of swing it around and be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. You don't have to go on missions to have action. You don't have to go on missions to feel like you're playing as Spider-Man. So
Marvelous
I
games.
yeah, I have not yet played the Miles Morales, but I really want to. It looks amazing.
Well, it's just as
So
good. And then we got Spider-Man 2, and then
yep,
they're working on more.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Um, so um, just a this is kind of an out there question because I know, like, especially since saying your memory's not the best. If you had to estimate how many comics you've read, what would be your like best ballpark estimate of how many comics you've read?
In the thousands, of course.
Thousands, okay. Like
Yeah.
high thousands, low thousands.
I couldn't tell you. I've just been reading comics consistently
Gotcha.
since I was a kid. So,
Okay. And then you said that your dad was like a collector. Like he had them
yep.
sealed, plastic sleeves, the whole bit. Like, is that your style? Like, do you have like your like mint conditions, or you more casual with your comics?
Far more casual with my comics. They're all still in boxes, I think, in my parents' house. I think they've sold some with my permission.
Hmm.
But I am in no interest, have no interest as a collector. I read them and move on. If I
Okay.
ever want, maybe someday I'll read them again, should I ever be in the mood. But nowadays, I read my individual comics digitally, so there's nothing to
Okay.
collect. But I buy the collected editions, trade paperbacks or hardcovers,
Hmm.
and those can go up on a bookshelf and be reread anytime. And sometimes I do reread my favorites there. But
Okay.
I am not at all a collector.
Okay.
That it's kind of a myth that comic books will make a lot of money if you save them for a long time.
Okay.
Most modern comics, there is a very big print run,
Right.
so that destroy. So that means they're not going to be rare. It's
Right.
only that those original comics from way back in the day, where no one thought to save them because they weren't
Right.
anything when they first came out.
They were
So it's
nothing better
the
than like Saturday morning cartoon, like Saturday morning comic strips. They were
yeah,
kind of meh. Like, who do I actually want these? Those are the ones that like are making money.
exactly. But that's
Yeah.
because of scarcity and rarity,
Right.
not because they're
Right.
anything special. It's just you
Right.
know, Superman #1 came out or Action Comics #1 came out, and it
Right.
was just a floppy thing at the magazine stand. You bought it,
Right.
read it, tossed it or whatever.
Right.
So there's no real point in collect. Well, obviously anybody can have a point for anything, but monetarily speaking, there's no point in collecting modern comics like the old comics because they're just not going to be worth anything someday. So,
Right. Right.
so yeah, so I got no problem with my parents selling them by the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Someday we'll have to get rid of them one of these days, and hopefully
Right.
we can just mass sell them somewhere to some collector somewhere. But yeah, I have
Yeah.
no personal interest in collecting.
Yeah. So the only ones you keep are when you buy that like kind of hard copy,
Yeah,
that you want to reread.
yep.
I'm
Put it
I'm
on my
assuming
bookshelf.
those are like the collections, not just like a single comic, right?
Right. There's, they bound 5 or 6 comics together or a full,
Right.
or if it's a mini series, they'll bind the whole mini series, or if it's
Right.
they tend to write story arcs to be 5 or 6 issues long,
Right.
or they'll go, maybe it's a specific creator who did a run on a comic and they'll
Yeah.
collect everything from that and just read his entire run.
Yeah.
Because creators tend to do very self-contained runs.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know, like, if I go to the library, I can pick up like the Watchmen as a
Yeah,
single hardcover thing,
exactly.
and I read that back, many years ago, but I got that from the library hardback. Read the whole thing and done instead of having to like, okay, where's the next issue? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you only really have like the series. If you had to estimate on like how many of those like hardcover series you have, could you give me an estimate of those?
Well, they're not all hardcover. A lot of them are soft cover. But
Okay.
I got hundreds here in my apartment, and then dozens more back at my parents' place from when I lived there and bought them. But
Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
nowadays hundreds.
Okay. And then on an average day, as somebody that, I mean, there's a lot of different publications going out, both physically, digitally. You have some. You talked about the um, not necessarily the big two, but there's a lot of different publishers out there putting out content. Like, how much time do you spend actually consuming content on a regular basis?
Not as much as I'd like. I read a couple of, like I said, digitally. I'll read new comics come out every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll read the series I'm currently following digitally. That's half a dozen issues at most per week.
Uh-huh.
And then I have fallen into the habit of buying these collected editions, but not yet sitting down and reading them.
Mm-hmm.
I have a gigantic stack here of comics wherein I feed my Amazon.com addiction and then just don't make the time to read them. So uh, someday, hopefully, I will make the time to read all these comics.
Gotcha. No, I definitely get that. I'm somebody that does that with a few different things. Like I get books that I'm like, yes, I'm gonna read this, and I'm like, man, I just haven't had time to read this. For me, I play Dungeons and Dragons, and so like I do collect like source books for Dungeons and Dragons sometimes because like there's a class or a specific item or something that I want in the book, or the book sounds really cool and I just haven't got around to actually exploring all the book that the book has. And I'm like, well, I'll get to it eventually.
That's exactly what it is for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, do you have any like good stories from being a comic book fan? Like any interesting things that like when you really get started talking about it, you have this like, oh, I once met so and so, or anything like that.
Well, I've been to a couple of comic book conventions where I've met some creators, but I'm terrible at meeting, I guess, for lack of a better term, celebrities. So,
Mm,
even meeting some of these creators whose work I've liked, I'm terrible at engaging them, short of saying, "Hey, I like your work. Can you sign this, or can I shake your hand?" So,
mm-hmm.
that's not as fun as exciting as it could be. But I've met plenty of creators that I really like.
Okay. Do you have any like especially fun days or like a really good memory from comic book collecting, or not collecting but like reading, like in the time that you've done this, have you had like this anything super exciting? Like did you I don't know. This is something I try and ask about different occupations, but like, is was there like a day that stands out amongst the rest of them of like, oh, I got to be one of the first to grab this comic, or anything like that?
No, not really. It's just
Okay.
essentially just sit and read a nice story. Some are better than others, and
Right.
I don't particularly remember
Yeah.
reading any that changed my life or altered the course of history or anything.
Sure.
It's just a fun thing to pick up and read every once in a while.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Like it was just something that was curious because like I mean, for my podcast, I have some that are like they are professionals in different industries that good days and bad days happen, and like sometimes those questions transfer over to the hobbyists and just personal passions. And it's just interesting 'cause sometimes they do have they do have similar stories and sometimes they don't, so it's just
hmm
never hurts to ask.
yeah, I mean, there's all sorts
um
of little things here and there. Like I said, been to plenty of conventions that are fun.
right, yeah. Do you have a favorite convention that you like to go to?
No. Um, Ultimately, everyone hears the phrase comic convention or Comic Con.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ultimately, honestly, they're mostly just uh vendor craft fairs. Um, where if you go to the bigger ones where the actual celebrities and creators are, obviously
Right.
you can go to like seminars or lectures they give, or they're called panels where they go and speak
Mm-hmm.
about it, or you can meet them if you're big into meeting celebrities. But ultimately, the bulk of a comic book convention, especially smaller ones, are just places where people are selling their stuff. And if I were rich, I would probably have a field day.
Right,
But I've
right.
never been rich whenever I go to these things. So even though I've been to a couple, I've been in New York City a couple times. I went to Baltimore once. I went to Boston a couple times, and there's some local ones I've been to.
Hmm.
Um, I don't necessarily like going because I'm not there. I don't want to be spending so much money. So,
Right,
so
right.
I don't really have a favorite that I attend. No.
Gotcha. I will say I do like that description of, the craft fair.
Yeah, it's a vendor fair. Some
Yeah,
people are selling toys. Some people have made their own comics to sell. Some people are selling their
yeah,
artwork. They're
yeah.
people selling jewelry they've made or books they've
Right.
self-published or something. But uh, as much as I would support other creators, I also support
It's a lot of
myself
money. You're right.
not spending money.
Yeah. Well, I have realized that there's a lot of things that I feel like we've made excuses to sell things at different events just because I was at Apple Festival a while ago, and they just had these like a bunch of tents set up where you like big huge tents, and you go in and it's just filled with different vendors of all sorts of stuff. And so this Apple Festival, where they're known for their like fresh apple fritters and apple pies and apple cider, I got a 3D printed octopus. you
Yeah,
know and when people are like, you got that at what? It's like, at an Apple Festival. It's like, why were
yeah.
they selling like 3D printed things at an? I was like, I don't know. But yeah, like, I never really thought about that, but I do like that description of just vendors, vendor craft fair.
That's how it
Um,
works.
yeah. Um, so this is another one that I'm not sure if it applies or not, and you can just let me know. But like, is there any like skill that you've learned because of this passion you have for comics?
Well, sure, it's improved my own writing. I write my own comics, and you got to learn if you want to do that kind of thing. You got to learn the trade, learn how they're paced, learn how they're written, learn how to develop characters and other basic writing things like that. So if I want to write my own, I got to read what they actually are. Otherwise, I'm not going to be knowing what I'm making.
So you actually write your own comic,
Absolutely, it is um, one of my like the again my passion of my life. I don't just
right?
read them. I'm attempting to make and publish my own.
How is that going?
Well, it's going fine. I wish I'd started 20 years ago.
Sure.
But then don't we all?
Right.
Um, I've got a series I write with a friend of mine. We've put out one graphic novel so far, and we're currently wrapping up the sequel, which will hopefully
Okay.
be out by the end of this year or early next year. And on the side of that, I've started working on my own solo series,
Okay.
which is slowed down only by the fact that I have to pay artists to draw it for me since I'm a terrible
Yeah.
artist.
Yeah.
So that's coming out. I've got half the first issue completed, and I got to figure out what to do with those pages, and then hopefully uh, pay for some more to be completed. But yeah,
Gotcha.
it's coming along rather nicely, I would say. So obviously, I wish I'd done it years ago.
Yeah. So go ahead and like what is it called? Like people wanted to find it. How would they go about finding those?
Absolutely. So my main series is called Gamer Girl and Vixen. It is an
Okay.
LGBTQ comic about two supervillains who meet cute on the rooftops of New York and use their powers to rob celebrities.
Oh, okay.
That all you have to do is Google Gamer Girl and Vixen. We're all over the internet, or
Nice.
gamergirlandvixen.com.
Okay.
Um, and you can find samples, you can find previews you can read, you can order our
Mm-hmm.
graphic novel, you can read some free pages we've done and just put on the internet. We are all over the place, so we've been doing that
Nice.
for about a decade now, so there's plenty of content out there people can find.
Okay. And then your personal project.
My solo series is just coming along. It's called Cover Bard. It's a fantasy Dungeons and Dragon kind of lighthearted comedy series.
Okay.
Instead of a cover band or a tribute band, he's a cover bard. In
That's
which in this
phenomenal.
fantasy setting, there's a more famous and popular bard, and my main character uh, plays cover songs of the famous bards. He plays cover songs in a local pub before going out on an adventure of his own.
I love that. Well, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out because that sounds really fun and just just great. Um, and then where would people find that?
That isn't anywhere yet. Like I
Oh,
said, I've
okay.
got half the first issue is
That's right. You said
complete.
half that. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and
Yeah.
once I have some more money, I'll finish up the first issue. I'll probably do a Kickstarter to raise money to get it printed, so I'll have actual
Nice.
physical copies, or we
Okay.
may just put it online for free to read. I got to talk with my partners about that. What the best way to get it
Yeah.
out there in the world is.
Well, whenever that does happen, just let me know and I can update my audience and let them know to jump on that Kickstarter and go out and get that comic when that does come out. Um, because I feel like a decent chunk of my audience would like Dungeons and Dragons themed comic books. So
There are plenty of them out there.
yeah. Um, so going back to the comics, and this can actually also apply to the new topic of your own comic. Um, Actually, that is almost better pivoted towards that. Um,
I'm sorry, Joe. I thought you knew this was one of the things I did.
I think I'd heard it mentioned, but when you mention it right now, I or before we started recording, when my wife December was mentioning it, I was like, oh yeah, we'll have to get to that. So it took a little bit, but yeah, um, I'll be honest, I completely forgot that has something that has been mentioned several times. So, um, but yeah, so with making a comic book, like, what is something that going into it, like, you thought was going to be kind of easy and it turned out to be hard, or vice versa, something you thought was definitely going to be super hard and turned out to be actually a lot easier than you thought.
Actually doing it is a lot easier than one would think.
Okay.
All it takes is money and people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I said, I'm a writer by trade. I can't draw for nothing, or can't draw for crap.
Yeah.
So I have to find artists and pay them to make my comic. And it is not hard at all finding artists. I'm part of plenty of subreddits and I know
Right.
websites and discords and whatnot where you can find people. But you gotta, be able to trust them. Plenty of scammers out there, of course, but
Right.
once you find an artist you like, once you have the money to pay them a fair price,
Mm-hmm.
they will draw your comic for you that you've written, and that's great. And we've only ever had success at Kickstarter. We've done 3 Kickstarters for Gamer Girl and Vixen so far. All of them have been a success. So we get to make our comic, and people pay for it and order their own copy, and that's how we pay our
Nice.
artists some of the times, or some of the times we pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
So the hardest part is just affording it, and the easiest part is actually doing it.
Nice. I like that, like, just do it, like, Nike-esque aspect of, like, it's just do it.
Yeah, there's nothing
Uh
to it. Once you know what you're doing, it's just a matter of doing it.
okay. And then so obviously comic books, both writing and reading them, it's pretty sounds like it's pretty positive. What are some of the least favorite parts about either of those?
I hate selling myself. I'm terrible at marketing myself, at
Self-promotion.
self promotion, at which is probably why you forgot about it, because it's not like I talk about it on my own at family gatherings or anything like that, or
Mm-hmm.
uh, with people. I don't bring it up. I would be more than happy to talk to people about it, but I am terrible about bringing it up
You
myself.
have to wait for them to bring it up before
Yeah,
you start
I'm not
talking
gonna
about
I'm not gonna start bringing it up myself and making people listen to me talk about it unless they're interested. So So I'm terrible at marketing myself. I'm terrible at sitting at. I've sat at some conventions to sell my own comics before, and I would talk someone's ear off about it, but I don't want to like sell it to them. I don't want
Okay, and
to.
I know you probably don't want to buy this, but I'll keep talking to you about the thing, even though you definitely don't want to buy it, right?
Well, no, they want to buy it. They'd be happy to buy it. It's just a matter of
Okay,
me convincing them. They're at a comic convention, like I said,
right.
to buy comics and find indie comics and stuff like that. So people have been happy to buy it. I just gotta,
Put
get
yourself
out of
out
my
there a little
comfort
bit more.
zone to sell it.
Gotcha. Okay. Um. So, thinking about like public service announcement style, like knowledge dump for other people. Like, is there anything that you wish more people knew about either reading comics or writing comics that you want to just put out there into the world?
Um, I mean, it's not just for kids. Like I said, there's
Okay.
every genre you can think of for books. There's a comic for it. So
Yeah.
get into comics as well. They're fun to read and
Yeah.
don't take won't take you hours or days or months to read all that text. There's a lot of great creators out there making great works.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I feel like comics and anime have a very similar like stigma about like, oh,
Yeah,
I
I'd
don't like
agree.
that genre. It's like, what genre? You mean the art style? Because like people are like, oh, I don't like anime because I just don't like them. It's like I don't like that genre. It's like what genre do you like? Do you like drama? Okay, here's half a dozen drama animes. Oh, you like action? Okay, let me give you 20 dozen action animes. Oh, you like the like more romantic stuff? Okay, here's this. Oh, you want a rom com? Okay, here's these. Like wait, really? It's like yeah, anime's not just Dragon Ball Z and Naruto.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got something for everybody. And like as someone that loves graphic novels and comics, like I'd go to my local library, and I'd go grab like the graphic novel version of like books that people read, and people don't realize like yeah, you can get popular books just like they turn it into a graphic novel, and so you're reading the same literature everyone else is, but you get to see the pictures that no one else does.
Yeah,
Okay, I
absolutely.
like
That's
that.
exactly as it is.
Yeah. Um, and then is there besides that, is there any other like assumptions that people make that are kind of like any stigmas that besides just that they're just for kids that you'd like to address?
Um, I don't know.
You don't have to have an answer for that. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not really. There's all sorts of. I'm sure people have all sorts of preconceived notions, but I
Yeah,
couldn't name any off the top of my head that, other than
that's fine.
that, comics are a lot more deeper and
Yeah.
better than people
I,
give them credit
I
for.
mean that one's a big one. I mean that's definitely a big
Yeah.
one. Okay. Um, for someone that's I'll give you this and see if you have one for each, but like for someone that's just starting to get into like comics, what would be the advice for like how to start off with just like someone's like, you know what, I'm an adult, I never read comics as a kid, like what would be your advice of how to start for them?
Use the internet. Use Google. Use Reddit. Google where to start in comics. There are plenty of people out there who would be happy to give you some recommendations. There are
All
plenty of
right.
websites and subreddits out there that have recommendations pinned to the, top of the message board.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Google the question, where do I start? How do I start? What are some recommendations? There are plenty of standalone stories you can buy in collected forms for good prices, or find at your local library, or find at used bookstores. Um, Plenty of comics are written in such a way. The saying is that every single comic is somebody's first comic. So, one
I
of the
love that.
unwritten rules of writing comics is always write to some degree to expect this could be someone's first comic. So,
Huh.
obviously, some things are serialized and part of an ongoing story and feature characters with 30 years, 40 years of history behind them. And some might get confusing, but there are a multitude of comics out there that are fresh and original and start at the very beginning for people to read.
I do like that thought of like the every comic is someone's first comic. I it makes sense to me because as a podcaster, that's something that I try and make sure that I'm doing with my podcast because like I don't expect people to watch every single like or listen to every single episode up to this one. So I try
Exactly.
not to like obviously there's things that I reference back to sometimes just because I'm a person that has done interviews with lots of people. Um but like I try not to make sure that it's not like okay, so just going over the you know the first five standard questions that I ask everybody anyway, so answer those really quick and then we'll get into the stuff for like I want to make sure that each person if they just like searched up you know comic interview or whatever,
Yeah.
that they start with this episode that they're not gonna like, okay, who is this guy that's talking? Okay, who's he interviewing?
Yeah.
I want people to understand like from any episode, if they click on any episode, they can jump in. The only ones that kind of don't do that are if it's like if it was a very long interview, like a 3-part episode, like a 3 hour interview that I did with somebody that I had to break up into 3 different episodes so that they're
Yep.
actually digestible. um, but like other than those specific things that do have like a part 2, that if you jump into an episode, it can be your first one, and you can go, okay, what else does he have? But I guess it never occurred to me that comic creators would also have that mentality of, well, what if this is the first comic someone's seen and they pick it up and they go, okay, what is going on?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe it's not as common in this day and age, but back in the day, you'd find comics at a newsstand or on a spinner
Right.
rack at a grocery store,
Yeah.
at your uncle's house, or
Right.
at the library or something. You just grab an issue, pick it up, read it, and you want the person to get hooked. You don't want them to feel lost. So,
Right.
there's recaps and dialogue and stuff
Right.
like that that really help
Yeah.
people get into the story.
Yeah, and I just know I guess it was just an interesting revelation to know that that's like a conscientious thing that people do. Okay. Um, and then I, I I can guess on one of the answers for this, but if you could go give yourself advice, go give your younger self advice.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the
Yep.
start earlier,
Yep.
but do you have anything besides that, or you want to go into more depth on like what specifically you tell yourself to do?
To just start writing earlier. I've been writing since I was a teenager, writing fan fiction on the internet.
Hmm.
Um, perhaps when I was younger, I had ideas writing novels or books or something like that. So perhaps pivot from those dreams to actually dreams of writing comics,
Okay.
and then pursue that as a career from the very beginning. I'm sure there would have been internships in college I could have pursued, or
Mm.
ways to get my stories out there from a younger age that I obviously know now. But had I known it then, maybe I would have tried, or you know, tried to get out there, tried to get discovered back at an earlier age. Um, yeah, the answer is, the best time to start something is right now, and the next best time to the best time to start something is 10 years ago, and the next best time to start something is right now. I think is the phrase.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just, I wish younger me had known what I know now about getting into comics and breaking into comics, and had started earlier and put focus on that.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the way you talked about just like, the easiest part was just doing it,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I feel this a very similar way about like podcasting in a lot of ways of like it seemed like a very daunting thing until, I was a part of it for somebody else. And then I was like, wait, that's it? That's
Yep.
all I have to do? Wait,
Yep.
hold on. I can do this.
Yep.
All right. So this is one of my favorite parts of my episode is I ask people about this magic snap. So I don't use genies because people always get suspicious of genies and the strings attached, but like this is like no strings attached. If you could snap your fingers and just realize a dream, what would the dream be? Like what would that look like? Like if you could have exactly what you want with your passion, what would that look like?
Writing for one of the big two comic publishers some of my favorite superheroes and telling my stories about them. The ones I'm imagining are the ones that come up once I start working for them. It'd be writing, a Robin comic by Sean Mills, or Spider-Man by Sean Mills.
Nice.
Um, yeah,
Okay. So just being being one of those comics you'd pick up at a newsstand or something like that, being able to be like,
exactly.
yes, I wrote that
To get
one
my
that
turn at some of these famous superheroes that I've loved since I was a
yeah,
kid.
I love that. I really do. All right, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to talk about? Any questions that I should have asked that I just didn't get to?
No, I think I've done a great job. We
Thank
talked
you.
about my reading comics and history of comics, and I got to plug my existing comics.
Okay. Is there anything that we talked about that you want to, rehash, dive deeper into at all that I just didn't quite get enough time to talk about?
Just anybody that's listening to this that's ever wanted to write a story, if you're, the saying is, everyone's working on their own novel. Consider pivoting from a novel to a comic. They're much easier to write, much easier to probably make, much easier to actually break into the comic industry than in the novel industry. And
Mm,
then it's just a matter of doing it and um, getting it out there. And
yeah.
it's so make it happen. Self-publishing comics is a thing, and then self-publishing your own novel is a thing. And personally, in my opinion, you go to these conventions and you see someone they're self-publishing their novel. It's a brick of a book that someone has to really be passionate about to sit down and read this brick of a
Hmm.
book, and it's usually part one of 10 for their magnum opus they've always been thinking about. Whereas if you're self-publishing a comic, it's typically just a floppy 20-page comic with fun
Sure.
artwork. Far easier for someone to just pick up and glance at,
Yeah.
to read your work than to expect them to read your self-published novel. So not to be too harsh on people that self-publish their own novels or
Sure.
stories online.
Mm,
But if your goal is to get your stories out there, consider comics.
yeah. And I also like the fact that like there is no like shame in like you have your story, but you're not a artist as far as like the drawing side of things, the pictures and stuff like
Yeah,
that, and like you don't let that stop you from creating a graphic novel when you can't do the graphics of it.
there
You just
are.
go there's people that'll do that. There's people that they don't have the story aspect of it maybe, and they need that story, but they can draw whatever they need to draw. They can create whatever they need to create. They just
Yeah,
need that plot, and it's like you can't even let that stop you of like, well, I've got this great story in mind, but I can't even draw stick figures well. Like, don't let that stop you.
yeah. There are plenty of artists out there on the internet who will happily draw your comic for you. Some will
Yeah.
do it. Workman like. Do the work, get paid, move on. There's some who will happily collaborate with you and work on join the project totally. Make friends
Hmm.
with them. Um, there are people in your life who might be artists who do this kind of thing, and
Right.
maybe they'll do it as a true partnership. But you
Yeah.
know, there are people out there who will draw your comic. If you're a movie
Yeah.
maker who can't afford to make their small indie movie, consider turning your script into a comic book script and hiring someone, and then boom, you've got a comic you can hand out next time you're at a Hollywood party trying to pitch it to somebody instead of
Right.
pitching it, just
It's a little
ordering
bit
them a
more
room.
fleshed out, a little bit more
Hand them your
seen.
comic, and they
Right.
can read your comic. Plenty of
It's
TV shows and movies are still adapted from comics these days.
Yeah. I mean that's like proof of concept too of like this
Exactly.
works. I can show you that the actual thing itself works. I just I would like this to be, a live action or whatever, thing happening, but here's the whole story. It works, people like it, you know. Yeah. And I would even flip the other way of like if you're someone that like wants to be in the comic and you can draw but you can't story.
Yeah,
I'm sure
you
you
will
can you
find.
can you can find the you can find the opposite, the empty side of that, you can find somebody that can do the what you're missing.
Yeah, you can offer your services for
Yeah,
sale, or you
yeah,
offer your services to pay for it, or someone to draw someone's comic. Just be like, I'm an artist trying to get more work, so I'm
yeah,
for sale. Here's my portfolio. Here are my rates. Let's make a comic together. So yeah, plenty of
yeah,
people, plenty of ways out there to find an artist or find a writer.
yeah. All right. And then you want to plug your website really quick, and then yeah, drop that comic you're working on as well one more time.
Yeah, so anyone that's interested can find us. Just Google Gamer Girl and Vixen, gamergirlandvixen.com. We publish under Very Big Comics. I think it's verybigcomics.com. Just Google it. Just Google Very Big Comics. Google Gamer Girl and Vixen at Global Comics is where you can find some of our work to read for free or to buy our graphic novel. Nothing yet out there in the world for Cover Bard, but there will be within the next year or so. And you can find some information at at Very Big Comics, our website. So just Google us. You should be able to find us.
Yeah, and like I said, as soon as there's information on that not Patreon Kickstarter, I'll be glad to publish that in show descriptions in future episodes and being like, hey, go check that out too. So
Sounds
keep
good.
keep me updated, and I'll keep my audience updated on that too. And yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure and a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for all of you out there listening, thank you so much for listening to me. Sorry for the very long break. Got a lot going on. Moved across the country, got a new job, and this is my first time announcing it here. But me and my wife are pregnant. We're expecting a baby at the end of February slash early March, and that has been taking a lot of my focus at the early stages as we were trying to get insurance settled and all that stuff. So that's been a lot, but I'm happy to finally be back in here. I am working back on my podcast, getting interviews set up and stuff like that. So thank you for your patience and thank you for staying with me. If you want to um, see more, see more, listen to more, find out more, you can always join my Patreon. That is where you get to hear the icebreaker questions I ask before the show. You get sometimes the behind the scenes. I also have mini episodes that I post there every once in a while. But that is patreon.com/Curious Joel. So if you want to support me there, that helps me move faster on certain things and be able to invest a little bit more in the podcast itself. You can also find me on Twitter slash X at Joel Circo, on Instagram at CuriousJoelcast, or email me at CuriousJoelcast at gmail.com. Thank you all so much for listening, and until next time, stay curious, y'all.